Today's critique examines a comprehensive framework for embedding military authority into durable, process-driven structures rather than relying on individual charismatic leadership. Let's dive straight into the feedback.
Yeah, let's get right into it because there is a lot of really good foundational stuff here.
Right, so starting off, transforming institutional architecture requires a dedicated framework for shifting mid-level officer development from personality-based leadership to process-based mastery.
Exactly. I really want to look closely at how this material handles that middle layer of command, you know?
Yeah.
Because the text does a great job diagnosing the problem of centralized power. It highlights this four-phase implementation cycle, and it heavily positions the senior NCO as the primary continuity architect.
Which is great.
Is. But, I mean, it feels like we have a massive blind spot right in the middle ranks.
Yeah, as I understand it from reading through, the text kind of just assumes junior and mid-level officers will naturally adapt to these new structural constraints.
Right. Just because the senior commander mandated them.
Exactly. And I look at it this way. Updating a unit's authority map, the documented execution defaults, it's like installing a brand new, highly efficient operating system across a massive network.
Uh-oh. That's a good analogy.
Thanks. Yeah, it looks fantastic on paper. But if your mid-level apps, meaning the junior and mid-level officers, if they are still coded for the old personality-driven system, the whole unit is eventually going to crash.
Yeah, they just won't know how to interface with the new architecture.
Right, without crashing the system entirely.
So is the text like completely ignoring them though, or is it just relying on standard, trickle-down leadership to get them up to speed?
Well, it relies heavily on trickle-down, which is exactly the weakness here.
Okay.
The material powerfully diagnoses the compression stage of centralized authority, that dangerous moment when independent decision-making declines, right?
Yes, and the unit's dependence on the commander just silently deepens.
Exactly. But it completely glosses over the active, deliberate mentorship required for mid-level officers who are caught in the messy middle of this transition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It just assumes that simply rewriting the authority map and defining those execution defaults will automatically update how these junior officers learn to lead.
Which we know doesn't happen.
Right. It lacks actionable methods to explicitly train these officers to distinguish between relying on personal trust and leveraging functional, process-driven authority.
And that is such a critical distinction to make. I mean, a junior officer's instinct, which is built by years of military culture and, frankly, historical case studies, their instinct is to rely on their tactical charisma.
Oh, 100%.
They're conditioned to be the hero, right? The guy who pushes through friction with sheer force of will.
Yeah, they want to be the one to save the day.
Exactly. So if the execution defaults mandate this kind of unglamorous, process-oriented escalation pathway,
They're just going to skip it.
yeah, their instinct will be to bypass it entirely just to get the job done faster. So how does an author explicitly rewrite that ingrained instinct within the text?
Well, the suggestion here is to design a specific mentorship framework and a training module section aimed directly at preparing those mid-level officers for decentralized decision-making duties.
Okay, so making it an explicit part of the curriculum.
Right, frame this so senior commanders can actively institutionalize these principles, shifting the daily metric of officer growth away from tactical charisma and toward architectural discipline.
I wonder what that actually looks like in practice, though.
Yeah?
Because we can't just tell commanders to, teach process. It needs rigid, testable frameworks.
Right, concrete examples.
Exactly.
So one suggestion to include might be a shadow command training module.
Oh, what's that?
So imagine a scenario where mid-level officers are tasked with operating a mission-critical task using strictly the documented execution defaults. Okay.
You intentionally strip away their ability to rely on personal charm, their rank visibility, or even their accumulated social capital.
Wait, really? But doesn't stripping away rank visibility in a military setting immediately induce chaos?
Yeah.
I mean, the hierarchy is basically the foundation of their operational speed.
Well, that induced chaos is exactly the point.
Oh, I see.
By forcing them into a scenario where their rank and their charisma carry absolutely no weight, they have to rely entirely on the written process to coordinate action.
Wow, yeah.
If the process is flawed or, if they don't understand how to wield structural authority, the mission fails in a controlled environment.
It exposes the gaps before it's a real problem.
Exactly. Now, a shadow command is just one way to tackle this, obviously. You could implement peer audits or rotating operational leads, cross-functional planning exercises.
Sure.
The point is that the author needs to provide at least a few tangible starting points to strip away that charisma crutch.
That's a great idea. And another concrete example that text could integrate is a specific mentorship checklist for senior officers.
Okay, how would that work?
So rather than just evaluating, say, an O3 on whether they accomplish the mission, this checklist explicitly evaluates them on their proactive ability to update and enforce the authority map.
Oh, wow. So we're fundamentally changing the definition of performance under supervision.
Exactly.
Because if a junior officer completes a mission, but does so by bypassing the execution defaults.
Right, by relying on sheer willpower.
Yeah. Relying on their own willpower, then the checklist forces the senior commander to actually score that as a failure.
Yes, because they haven't strengthened the unit. They've weakened it by proving that the system is optional.
Man, that is a really powerful shift.
It is. If the mid-level officers aren't evaluated on their ability to build and respect the architecture, you will constantly have officers fighting the very systems the NCOs are trying to preserve.
Right. It just turns into a constant tug-of-war.
Exactly. But even if you manage to rewire those mid-level officers, moving to our next point, robust system continuity demands a logical sequence for stress testing command structures specifically against unexpected leadership absences during the highly vulnerable change of command period.
Yes. Let's unpack how the material currently approaches this, because I think there's a big gap here.
Okay, go ahead.
So the text lays out 4 stress test scenarios, right? A planned absence, an unplanned departure, a concurrent transition, and a high-tempo transition.
Right. And it mandates running those exercises roughly 60 days before a permanent change of station or a PCS.
Yes. The outgoing commander runs the test to ensure the system is stable before they leave.
Right.
But I have to ask, doesn't running stress tests solely as a pre-transition exercise create this massive false sense of security?
I think so, yeah. It seems like we're ignoring the reality that systems are actually most fragile immediately after a leadership change, not before it.
Exactly. That's the vulnerability.
The current implementation cycle logically outlines stress testing before transition to make sure the incoming commander inherits a functional system.
Right, which sounds great in theory.
Yeah, but the weakness is that it completely overlooks the compounding risk of the actual transition window itself.
Yeah.
It fails to test if the newly established framework contains clear mechanisms for continuity after the new commander arrives.
And that post-transition period is so critical. I mean, that's when institutional memory drops to its lowest point.
Right.
And mission-critical tasks often secretly drift back to relying on specific remaining individuals like a chief petty officer or a first sergeant.
Yep. Rather than the structural system itself.
Right. It basically creates an illusion of stability.
Exactly. The outgoing commander runs the stress test, the system holds, they hand over the guidon, and they leave feeling totally accomplished.
Yeah, they pat themselves on the back.
Right. But the incoming commander, they don't possess the mental model of the unit yet.
No, they don't know the informal networks.
Or the localized operational quirks. If the system hasn't been tested with them actually sitting in the seat, there is literally no empirical proof that it survived the transfer.
So the suggestion here is to restructure the implementation timeline in the text to mandate unexpected absence simulations immediately following a rollout or a leadership transition.
Yeah, exactly. The author needs to outline specific strategies for senior commanders to verify that the unit relies purely on self-imposed institutional constraints rather than residual personal trust during this highly volatile phase.
Right, because we have to prove the system works with the new variable in place.
But what does that actually look like in a high-stakes environment? I mean, if I'm an incoming battalion commander, the last thing I want is a manufactured crisis while I'm still trying to learn the names of my company commanders.
Well, which is precisely why it must be mandated by the institutional architecture, rather than left to the new commander's discretion.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so for a concrete example, the text could introduce what we might call a 0-hour simulation, implemented 14 to 30 days after a change of command.
Okay.
And in this simulation, the new commander is unexpectedly isolated from communications for 48 hours to verify the system's health.
But wait, why 14 to 30 days? Why not wait until like 90 days, once they're actually settled in and comfortable?
Because 14 to 30 days is the exact window where the initial honeymoon period ends and the real operational friction begins.
Ah.
Right. The unit is basically watching the new commander to see what rules are actually enforced versus what is just, on paper.
They're testing the boundaries.
Exactly. So if the new commander suddenly goes dark in that specific window, you get raw, unfiltered data.
Does the unit default to the documented authority map?
Exactly. Or do they freeze up because they haven't yet built a personal relationship with the new leader? It forces the unit to rely on the process, not the personality.
That makes a ton of sense. And to supplement that, as another example, the text could insert a sequence step requiring unannounced, regular after-action performance reviews led specifically by the NCOs.
Okay.
These reviews would be designed to audit whether the unit has maintained the documented execution defaults or regressed into personality-dependent habits since the handover.
I can see the friction there, though.
You think?
Yeah. Imagine an NCO leading a debrief and potentially telling a brand new senior commander that their recent optimization efforts actually bypass the established escalation pathway.
Oh yeah, that requires a tremendous amount of institutional backing.
A lot of backing.
It does, but it prevents what the text calls optimization from quietly turning back into compression.
Right.
Because new leaders, they always want to optimize. They want things to run smoothly according to their own historical preferences.
Sure, it's human nature.
But if that optimization quietly overwrites the structural defaults, the unit just becomes fragile again. Having the NCO run an unannounced audit forces the unit to confront that authority inertia in real time.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And obviously, a 48-hour blackout and NCO audits, those are just a couple of potential tools among dozens the author could choose to include.
Right, they're just examples.
The broader requirement is simply that the text must provide mechanisms to test the system after the new leader is installed, not just before they leave.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final hurdle. Let's assume the unit successfully rewires its mid-level officers, and it successfully navigates that vulnerable post-transition window.
Okay.
Ensuring long-term system sustainability necessitates specific checkpoints and multi-phase implementation plans tailored for senior staff overseeing multi-year institutional development.
Yes. This is where we move from the micro level of unit command up to the macro level of institutional governance.
Exactly.
Because the material outlines unit-level governance using what it calls the BLADE protocol.
Right. And for those unfamiliar, the BLADE protocol, which stands for benchmark, lever, alignment, data, experiment, it's essentially a tight 90-day feedback loop designed to help local units rapidly test and adjust their operational processes.
Which is a very sharp, concise tool for tactical adjustments.
It is.
But I really struggle to see how this scales. Over a multi-year horizon, how can senior leaders ensure that these self-imposed institutional constraints actually increase legitimacy across the broader force, rather than just evolving into localized bureaucratic red tape?
That lack of scale is exactly the core weakness of the final implementation section.
Yeah.
The material provides an excellent 90-day cycle for unit-level adoption, but it lacks a macro-level, multi-year, overarching strategy for senior commanders who have to institutionalize these principles across multiple commands simultaneously.
Right. Because a 90-day feedback loop just cannot monitor the degradation of a system over 3 years.
It's impossible.
The text is missing the necessary checkpoints to ensure that, years after the initial rollout, expanded emergency authorities have fully contracted and the system's structural legitimacy actually remains intact.
The text explicitly mentions Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus, treating it as a temporary wartime necessity.
Sure.
But authority inertia is incredibly powerful. When a crisis hits a military unit, power centralizes rapidly to ensure survival.
Which is necessary in the moment.
Right. The problem is that when the crisis passes, that centralized power feels comfortable to the commander. It feels efficient.
Yeah, they don't want to let it go.
Exactly. So without a multi-year horizon built into the framework, how does a 2-star general overseeing 5 different brigades know that those centralized emergency powers actually contracted back to the execution defaults?
Well, they have absolutely no idea unless a specific mechanism is built to measure it.
Right.
So the suggestion here is for the text to propose a multi-year implementation plan and verification checkpoints designed explicitly for senior commanders overseeing long-term succession planning.
Yes.
Detail how these senior leaders can actually monitor system health across the force, proving that self-imposed constraints continuously amplify authority and legitimacy over time rather than slowly eroding.
So what kind of macro-level architecture could the author provide as a concrete example here? Because it has to be something that doesn't just generate more paperwork for the sake of it, right?
Oh, definitely. Nobody wants more paperwork.
No.
So the author could add what we'll call a year 3 checkpoint.
Okay, how does that work?
At this juncture, senior staff conduct a cross-unit review of all emergency authorities invoked over the past 36 months.
Got it.
And the sole purpose of this review is strictly verifying that those powers contracted once the crises passed. It basically forces the institution to confront its own authority inertia by demanding proof that the system returned to its baseline state.
I like the idea of forcing proof of contraction. That's really strong.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is looking backwards every 3 years enough to change behavior in the present?
What do you mean?
Well, what if we tied this directly to career progression? A second concrete example the author could use is establishing a continuity audit board comprised of cross-branch evaluators.
Okay.
This board would verify system health post-rollout, linking structural compliance and the active distribution of authority directly to senior officer promotion criteria.
Oh, wow. I mean, that represents a massive paradigm shift.
It does, doesn't it?
Because right now, rank and promotion boards evaluate compliance with institutional standards, time and service, and, the absence of disqualifying failures.
Right.
Sometimes they actually reward heroic micromanagement because it results in short-term mission success.
Exactly. But if you link promotion to whether an officer has successfully distributed authority and built a resilient system that operates without them,
You are fundamentally changing the military incentive structure.
right.
But doesn't that risk penalizing commanders who take over deeply broken units?
How so?
Well, think about it. If a commander has to step in, centralize power, just to stop a unit from failing a deployment workup, and they don't have time to build out a decentralized structural system before their PCS.
Ah, the continuity audit board might tank their career, even though they literally saved the unit.
Exactly.
That is a highly realistic scenario, and the text would absolutely need to account for it.
Yeah.
However, the underlying philosophy of the material is that heroic intervention is a failure of system design.
That's true.
If an officer saves a unit through centralization, but fails to build a system that prevents the next failure, they really haven't solved the institutional problem.
No, they've just kicked the can down the road.
Right. So by instituting a continuity audit board, you measure the architecture they leave behind. You measure what remains when you actually remove the leader.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Again, this is just one conceptual avenue to explore, but the text must offer senior staff a way to enforce system building at the strategic level.
And it really brings everything full circle. I mean, the Blade protocol handles the 90-day tactical adjustments, which allows the unit to breathe and adapt.
Yes.
But a continuity audit board or, a similar multi-year verification plan, that protects the 36-month strategic vision.
Exactly. It prevents the slow, silent creep of personality-driven leadership from reinfecting a unit years after the initial architecture is established.
And it directly serves the material's main goal, right? Embedding authority into durable structures.
Right.
Tying promotion to system building guarantees that the institution values architects over mere operators. It builds a culture that truly understands that friction, oversight, and self-imposed constraint, those are the guardians of long-term power.
Perfectly said. So, just to recap, the foundation of this framework makes a compelling case for systems that outlast leaders.
It really does.
To elevate the material further, we recommend the author build a dedicated mentorship framework to transition mid-level officers away from tactical charisma.
Right.
Also, shift the stress testing timeline to aggressively cover the vulnerable post-transition window.
Yep.
And finally, establish a multi-year verification plan for senior staff to ensure long-term system sustainability.
Yeah, these structural additions will, I think, deeply refine the operational impact of the text.
I agree. So please submit your revised work back in again for more feedback. We would love to see how these concepts evolve.
Absolutely. Because a brilliant blueprint only matters if the load-bearing pins are tested under the real weight of the institution.
Well said. Until next time.